Hello, I'm Chris Edgar. Welcome to another Blackmagic Collective event. Today we have an event that's after my own heart because I'm a composer for film and TV, and so are the other people who are on this panel, and there's some really amazing people who you're going to meet very soon. Blackmagic Collective is a collective of film and TV artists and crew. Just in case you are not acquainted with us, we meet regularly on the business and craft of filmmaking with education events that focus largely on the tech side, but we do a little bit of everything, as you're going to see from this panel today. We're not going to talk solely about gear. As much as I think, me and the other gear nerds on the panel would appreciate that, we're also going to talk about the craft of making music for film and TV, so I'm pretty excited about that. If you'd like to join Blackmagic Collective, our membership is free. And if you join today, you are eligible to win a seat of Blackmagic Design's product, DaVinci Resolve, which is an editing suite, and a lot of other things too. It's pretty awesome, and if you haven't had a chance to check that out or you don't know anything about it yet, I would definitely recommend signing up. And yeah, that'll put you in the running to win that contest. Welcome to everybody who is joining us. And please let us know what brings you here today. What is your discipline? So are you on-screen talent? Are you camera? Are you post-production, like the people we're going to be talking to today? Just take a moment to let us know in the comments box on YouTube or Facebook, wherever you might be watching. Another detail about Blackmagic is that we do have, Blackmagic Collective is that we do have our film festival coming up on November 13, and that's going to be an online event, so you can watch it anywhere you are in the world. With that, I'll get to introducing our panelists today. The first one I'll introduce is Joseph Carrillo. Joseph is a composer and orchestrator working in Los Angeles. His recent projects include the original score for the true crime mockumentary Horror in the High Desert, orchestration for both Netflix's sports documentary series Untold and the Oscar-nominated score Minari. Upcoming projects include Sanctuary Songs, featuring cello soloist David Mergen, a compilation of art film music from recent museum exhibitions in the LA area, and an electro-industrial song about vampires. We should definitely talk about that. Is that a song that you're going to be like singing on? Are you performing the song yourself?
Unfortunately for everyone, yes.
I say the same thing about songs that I'm singing. So yes, I know the feeling. So why don't we let's get to our next guest, Emer Kinsella, and she is a violinist and composer, and much more. Known for creating poignant soundscapes, Emer has been involved in critically acclaimed films, television series, and live performances. Having played violin since the age of 2, her scores combine introspective strings with electronic sounds and ambient vocals. In 2021, she won Best Score for In Orbit at the Venice Shorts Festival and the Bucharest Shortcut Cinefest Festival, and was the first recipient of the CSAC/New Music USA Real Change Grant Award to create her score to the psychological feature thriller She the Creator. Hopefully you actually got to go to Bucharest, Romania, although I guess during this period of time, I guess that's not a guarantee.
Hi. No, I didn't get to go, actually, unfortunately.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah. A lot of us haven't got the opportunity to go places, but hopefully, getting back to Europe, that's one of the things that is definitely on my list when traveling.
Yeah, me too. Sometime soon.
Yeah. And with that, last but not least, I'll introduce Joy Ngiaw, who is a Chinese-Malaysian film composer based in Los Angeles. Most recently, she composed for Apple Original Films and Skydance's debut animation Blush, directed by Emmy Award-winning filmmaker Joe Mateo and executive produced by John Lasseter. Other recent scores include Walt Disney Animation Studios' short films Ngiaw, a VR animated short A Kite's Tale, and Netflix's feature film June and Kopi. Joy's score to the film Fish Head was awarded Best Original Score at Asians on Film Festival 2020. She's also contributed to a wide variety of critically acclaimed works, including TV shows Legion, Cobra Kai, The Night of, Impractical Jokers, the movie, On the 12th Date of Christmas, and video game What Remains of Edith Finch. Hi, Joy.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, all of you, for being here. So you're all professional film and TV composers, and I think why don't we start in terms of the questions that we'll discuss, how you would go about getting into doing this, because there's a lot of people who want to do this and a lot of people for whom the route to getting into composing for TV and film and other media and so forth is not necessarily clear. I know that some people, they work as assistants, at least, starting out their career when they come out of conservatory or university or whatever, for a composer who's working on big budget projects. But there are some people who are like independent film artists who get into composing for larger projects, and they just and so it seems like it's kind of an organic process that differs on a case by case basis. But what would you say about that? Like for people who want to get into composing for this type of media?
I guess
what do you think about that? Oh, go ahead, Joy.
I guess in start, like you said, I think it's a very organic process. Like everyone has different paths. There's no one way for sure. How I started was I started as an assistant for TV composer Jeff Russo, and then a documentary composer Joe Goodman. So while I was being assistant, it's so great to learn from different teams and how the different professional composers, what their workflow is. And from there, I kind of picked up like things that would work for me. And while I was assisting, I was also doing my own freelancing as well, because that's my main goal. I want to be my own composer. So that was my path. And a lot of fellow composers that I've spoken to, they all have different, how they got into the business is different. But ultimately, it's just to keep working on your craft, keep meeting people, and try different collaborations. At least that's how I came about.
Yeah, I think everyone comes into it differently. I came into it first as a violinist, playing violin my whole life, from the age of 2 years old, and then suddenly caught the composition bug and started composing myself, and then applied for master's at Columbia College Chicago, and then things kind of continued from there, and I moved to LA. Also did some assisting, first for as an arranger for Johnny Klimek, and then continued a lot of doing my own projects quite early on, and just getting into film world and meeting directors. So I think really just then meeting people and getting your own projects, a mixture of also meeting through collaborations with other composers, kind of builds on that.
Definitely.
How about you, Joseph?
I actually started writing music for theatrical productions, and I was kind of doing some incidental music because back 100 years ago when I was in school, there really wasn't a film program at the college that I went to. There really wasn't much happening in film other than at USC or New York, really anywhere at that time. So that was kind of the way in. But I mean, like a lot of that was also about like understanding dramatic arcs, and so all of that experience was really valuable. Just getting that experience for writing for a story and using music to reinforce the emotion and tell the story. But writing music for theater is much more tricky than writing music for film.
So for live theater?
Yes.
Yeah, I have no idea what that's like. I have no experience doing that. What are the differences between that and the recorded media format?
Well, I mean, with recorded media, I mean you have a specific timeline in which to aim for, and in live theater, sometimes people will pause a little bit longer than they did the night before, and then the music runs out, and then you're like, get off the stage, get off the stage. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I've been amazed by the musical theater productions I've seen in the smaller, like 99-seat theaters in LA, where the actors, they now have to work with a recording. And so they need to make sure that they're spot on because, of course, they can't miss their cue to come in with a vocal or it's going to sound ridiculous.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, there's a question about whether you should put your questions in the chat. Yes, please do. And then we'll make our best effort to answer that. Why don't we, so now we've talked a little bit about the route in terms of getting into doing this. And as you can see, there's a lot of very different responses, a lot of very different paths. It's not like not necessarily like a formal job interview process where you send lots of resumes out and so forth. It's really about meeting people, and maybe there's some luck involved, but I think knowing a lot of people and just keeping in touch with them about the projects that they might be involved in, and asking questions about them, just being curious about it. I mean, that's my sense of the best way to get gigs, even if it's not 100% clear how there's no like formal process for doing it. Why don't we talk a little bit about the composing process? So obviously this, you get a cut of the film or of the TV episode or whatever it is that you're working on at some point. And obviously you want to get a sense of what the director would like you to do with it from a musical perspective. How do you go about communicating with the director about the sound they want for the film? I mean, there's sort of the mechanics of it. Maybe you'll have like a spotting session where you meet with the director and you both watch. For example, for me, I usually say, look, if you have a specific piece of music that you want me to imitate, right? Feel free to send that to me. Send me a YouTube link or something like that. If you want me to sound like this piece, I'm not going to feel too boxed in by that. Instead, it's actually going to make the process easier. But what would you say about, communicating with the director about the type of sound that they want for the film?
I guess I can start again.
Yeah.
For me, the story always comes first. And the meeting, that's why the meet and greet with the director is absolutely the most important part of the process, I feel. Like the recent film I've done, Blush by Skydance, when I met with Joe Mateo, we talked about why he wants to make the film and what is his message he wants the audience to feel. And it was a personal story about his wife, his wife who unfortunately passed away because of cancer. So as we were talking about the story, I started to envision what is something that I can help translate that message of how family is just like our air. So with those thematic in mind, I started to incorporate some like breath sound effects or anything that showcases like wind instruments or like something that's like an air kind of element. And that wouldn't have gave me that idea until I had that conversation with him. So for me, like getting to the core of why the director wants to tell that story and how music can help, it certainly is such a collaborative process, and it just takes the composition and the story to a next level, I feel. Yeah. So that's kind of what I think is the most valuable in starting a collaboration.
Were you going to say something, Emer? Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, the conversation I find is the most important for the director to really find out what they're looking for the story, emotionally and conceptually. So I love to like start with asking them about conceptual words and taking that and kind of pulling apart with where I'm going to go with the music. Like this narrative feature that I finished recently, She the Creator, with Eddie Wall. There was a scene, even when you get further into specific scenes, like there's their overall vibe, and then it might be a specific scene where you're both trying to figure out, okay, what does this really need? And she gave me some examples for this specific scene, and I took it based off of what's she trying to really say with the scene, and then just kind of go into my own world and create new sounds, and then I use my violin viola as well sometimes to mix up the sounds and try new textures. But for this one, there was a specific, I got this like kind of like a puppet vibe from the character, that she's now just kind of like a puppet, and the music needs to be very like rigid and almost like a puppet. So I kind of worked off that and make sure that like anywhere I went, that I had the music stayed within this line. And then that was probably the most difficult scene of the whole film. But then I feel like I cracked it, and then we watched it again. She's like, okay, yes, that's the direction I'm going. So I'll go like as deep as I can into the conversation, back and forth, to make sure I'm really going in the right direction. Yeah.
So you started out with a cue that the director said, yeah, this really expresses the puppet-like nature of the character, and then that became your jumping off point for the rest of the score.
Well, I thought about the puppet. So most of the film, there was no temp or anything. So I just created my own sounds and worked with the director in the conversations we had. This one, she had a specific idea in mind. So what I kind of just investigated from that idea was what really she wanted out of it. And then I discovered it was kind of this puppet feeling. So she didn't actually say puppet, but through the conversations, that's kind of what I distilled it down to. And then I wrote music that was kind of like puppet-like in nature.
And Emer mentioned the temp track. That's a track that the editor is editing, a track of music that the editor is editing along with before the composer does their work. And sometimes the director can become really wedded to the temp track, as everybody who's on this call knows, and want what the composer does to sound like the temp track, which can be, you know, that can box you in a little bit. Although it can also provide some guidance if you're trying to find some kind of meeting of the minds, in my experience. What do you think about this issue, Joseph, as far as the most effective way to communicate with the director regarding the vibe that they want the music to have?
I really like actually having temp tracks. I don't mind having a temp at all to work from. A temp love is the thing that scares me, but when they fall in love with the temp. But having the track, like, that's such a great way to communicate with the director back and forth. And sometimes we'll just sit and listen to music that either has something to do with the film or doesn't have anything to do with the film. It's just stuff that the director enjoys. And sometimes it's about just figuring out what their aesthetic is and the things that really inspire them. Because a lot of times, you know, people when they're creating work, they have something in mind, and I imagine that a director has like sort of a general piece of music or like an emotional direction, you know, just as they're communicating to the actors to move in a certain direction. You know, they want the music to move in a certain direction and the emotion to flow that way as well. And so I feel like all of that is very useful in terms of being able to communicate.
Yeah, that is similar to what Joy was saying before about how you want to get a sense of the emotional space that the director is coming from. And that feels like the most important thing. Yeah, and I think that is the most important aspect. I mean, there's the nuts and bolts aspects of the sort of the spotting session, like I want the cue to begin here at this particular time code and so forth. A cue meaning a discrete piece of music, by the way, for anyone who isn't familiar with the terminology that we're using. But the sort of the overall emotion and the motivation behind the director wanting to do this movie, I think that probably is the most important thing for me too. And we have a couple of questions here. Why don't we go to one of them? This is from Consuelo Civoletto, Civoletto Corday. What are good sound libraries to use? So here we've got another gear nerd. I'm sure that we all are, e.g. Vienna, East, West, etc. What are there sound libraries that you all would swear by?
I say none
honestly,
of them.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I feel that it really depends on the composer, Chris, and in my experience, like having a lot of sound libraries versus being very familiar with the sound library that you have. I think that's more important because like there are some libraries that I would work with a lot, like some string library from Spitfire that I would use all the time, and I'm really familiar with how it works, but it may not work for another composer. So I think it's more important to really be familiar with your gear and the software. I think that's more important than having a lot or specific, brands. What do you guys think?
I think it depends on the palette that you need for whatever film or show you're working on, and how whatever your voice gravitates towards working with. If there's a particular sound library, you've already listed a few that you've tried and then you still might want to bring that to another level by recording live strings at the end. I always go to my violin viola first or cello, but I'm more into kind of creating the soundscape first, or I love output stuff for synths, so a lot of their stuff I use, and I think it's just for sound libraries, it's they're all out there, so just trying them and getting good at them depending on what you need them for.
I think it's definitely like I mean, in some ways, using sample libraries like that are kind of like our instruments. So just, yeah, as Joy said, and uh, being familiar with how you can use it to the best of your ability, I think is probably the most important thing to look into. But I mean, just like a DAW, but whichever, digital audio workstation software you're using is, if you're using Logic or Cubase or Digital Performer or whatever, then it's mostly, I mean, a lot of them are very similar in terms of the way that they operate. And it's all about how familiar you are with it, and, how you can best use it to communicate.
Yeah, and Consuelo, as for your question, you talked about Vienna and East West. I mean, they make a lot of different types of sound libraries, whether they, are orchestral instruments or they're more electronic synthy sort of stuff. But so, but within those, you'll see a large number of different sound libraries that it's just really important to kind of try on a case-by-case basis and see if they work for you. But like Joy was saying, I think that just being really familiar with the sound library, like East West, Hollywood Strings, for instance, that feels like that's kind of a lifetime to master that.
Yeah.
Just because, I mean, in terms of how to essentially how to make the MIDI that you enter sound like real strings, which is, a perennial sort of challenge in creating the mock-up or that, in other words, before you record real instruments, we create usually on these TV and film projects and so forth, we create what's known as a mock-up, which is supposed to give the director a sense of what the score will sound like before any live instruments are actually recorded. And hopefully the budget allows for the recording of live instruments. And we get to work with people like Emer on the violin, who I was fortunate enough to be able to work with on a project.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Which is going to be that's going to be announced soon. The film festival run of that is going to start pretty soon. So hopefully you'll get a chance to see that and see your handiwork in action. Why don't we go to the next question we have here from Alexander Bernstein. One of your best, well, yeah, I think we covered that to some degree, but notes are a good subject because inevitably when you send a music cue to the director, you're probably going to get some notes. You're going to get their comments on what they think could be done, differently or better. What kind of notes do you like to hear, and what do you want the director to understand? Presumably that means in the conversation about how to interpret the notes.
Yeah, I love notes actually. I get a lot. I think you can learn a lot just from working with your director. If the version one is there's something in the version one that's not working by like version two, like I usually after a conversation with the director, I'll like absorb like more like really the full meaning of what, maybe what we talked about first was half there, and then even the director understands it more after hearing the version one. By version two, it's usually like I usually have it like more spot on, just from kind of absorbing what we talk about, and then I'm especially as we get through more cues throughout the film. Then I like after notes from the director. Then at one point it's just like, okay, I get what you mean now. Like no, like we're on definitely on the same train. But really, if you're working on a cue for a while, sometime, and if it doesn't seem to be working, just having like a quick conversation with the director can just clarify everything just for both of you, and can make just finishing that cue much easier. Like, oh, okay, I got it. Yeah, no, it just makes sense. Or I think from getting notes through emails, I mean, often that might be the only way you get it for a while, but I do think the actual conversation, talking even over Zoom, is just so much more beneficial because you'll just kind of get the vibe much more of what the director really wants there, and it can be much faster as well to understand.
I think it's easier to isolate like it within a cue, like when you're talking live, that figuring out like what is working and what isn't. Like, is it like a high frequency? Is it a drum or something that's going in the background? Like you get that face to face, and you get to actually. I think it's a much easier. I totally agree.
Yeah, sometimes they're like, that sound kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. Okay, you know, they can't really say that in an email, yeah.
And I also really like to encourage the directors to kind of talk in emotions as well, because sometimes the director will say, oh, sorry, I don't know the musical term to how to describe this. And I'm like, it's okay. Like, what do you feel? Like, what does this sound make you feel? Is it too shrill? Does it make you feel a bit too anxious? Like, we start describing it using words and emotions. And I think that's how I like to get the conversation going, because ultimately it's up to us to interpret the notes from the director and translate that into score. And a huge part of course, storytelling is just conversations, like what we all have been talking about. So it's the best part, honestly, of this job. It's not just music, but you're also talking about the story.
That collaboration.
Getting to collaborate.
Yeah, it's really about just understanding the story and what you're telling at any moment.
I don't think I've ever worked with a director who has a musical background. It's always been someone who will tell me, could we have more of a whoosh here or a boom there? And like you were saying, Joy, I mean, that's part of the fun of it, is trying to translate what they're saying into music.
Yeah.
And from their point of view, and then it's gratifying that from their point of view, it seems like you're kind of doing magic. Like, oh, you created the whoosh. I didn't even know how to express that. And I wasn't talking in terms of modulation or time or anything like that.
Isn't it such a fun process? Because I almost feel like their stories influence how we write. So it is such a collaborative process, and it's so fun. It's like we're helping them, but they're also helping us in the same time, and that's like super gratifying experience, I think.
Yeah, it's great to see where your music can develop just after working on a film. Like maybe a cue I might have done, I might have thought, okay, that might work, but then after the director, they actually like, you have the conversation and elevates it to another level.
And speaking of that, I mean, we were talking a little bit about Emer, about the first you sent this sort of first cue to the director, and that ended up being the springboard for the rest of the score. And that's usually what I like to do too. I know that there are some composers who start by sending sort of a mock-up of a recurring theme in the film, or a sketch, I guess it's sometimes called, as opposed to a cue for a specific scene. Like I know I was watching a video where Junkie XL is talking about that, like the importance of starting out with a theme as opposed to a particular cue. But I like to dive right in and just work on the first cue from the beginning, and hope that will set the tone. What's the first thing that you all sort of send the director to get a sense of whether you're on the right track, essentially?
I think that one, it depends from film to film. That one was, I think I started with the opening first and got the vibe for that, and the puppet scene was a bit later. I've done it both from like a script level where we've talked about conceptual words, and I've written like a whole kind of sweet piece. Often it'll be like I'll just jump into a cue and like look at multiple scenes and start with whichever cue I think might bring more ideas to get things started. But I do like having both the option to, at the beginning, just think about the story and try ideas without looking to picture. But if I already have the picture, then maybe having looked at it first and then thinking about a specific scene or specific concept that's happening in the film. But I also enjoy going from just having a talk about the script and saying, okay, can you write something in this vein, which doesn't happen as often, but like a piece that comes out of that can work just as well later, whether it's cut up or in a specific cue later.
I feel like establishing like a character theme and a sound palette in the beginning definitely helps, because then once we decided on a direction, they're like, oh, I think this is the sound of what we want this film to sound like. From there, we can always, there's character development, there's theme variations, and it will be much more smooth sailing from there. So I love to submit something beforehand, before the actual scoring begins, to see if we're on the right track.
One of the things that I did couple of films ago, the first thing that I sent to the director was actually the audition for the film, and he sent me a short scene. It was about 2 minutes or so, and so I had scored that and sent it back, and he was just like, "Yes, I want you to score this film," and sent me the rest of it. But like within that, I basically approached that process like I was setting it up to score the entire movie. And so it had like the sound palette that I used and all the same instruments. And I just, most of that cue ended up in the final film, just sort of as is. So that was kind of a lucky thing that happened, but we just immediately started talking and were just instantly on the same page. But a lot of that came from, that initial bit of sound that I had sent him.
Yeah. Just to be clear. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh.
No, you were about to say something?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, I was just finishing a documentary where at the beginning, I sent a few ideas first that the director then listened to and said, this one is really what the film's about. But that only worked for certain cues, but then I knew at least I had this theme for those specific cues, and then could work around that.
Yeah, and just so that everyone understands what we're talking about when we talk about a sound palette. I mean, that could mean the specific types of instruments. It could also mean the sort of set of effects, sort of the sound design of the piece, and just so it could mean it's essentially if there can be themes, there can be melodies that recur throughout the film or the TV show and so forth. But also we want to establish a distinct sound. Like Joy was talking about the use of wind instruments for the film that she did most recently, and how that followed from the conversation with the director. And that seems like a very distinct sort of sound palette choice there. Getting to another audience question here. What would you advise a newcomer who doesn't live in a big city to start from in terms of composing for media, e.g. approach music supervisors directly? Well, I mean, yeah, from my point of view, since so much of the world is online now, that to some extent offers more opportunities for people who aren't necessarily in LA and New York. But what would you all say about that question?
For me, how I started when I first started to find my own projects was I moved to LA first, and then I went to film festivals in person pre-COVID, and it's like such a great way to meet people, because during those film festivals, like you see a range of like 10, 20 short films, and everyone had their own story to tell in different perspectives. And that's where I formed a lot of the connections there, being curious, like what Chris said in the beginning, like getting interested in someone's story from a genuine place. And then you start a conversation from there. And that's how I usually find the most authentic collaborations, I feel. It's a bit harder in the beginning because if you don't know anybody, but like Chris said, like there's so many virtual events online now, like showing up to panels like this, or there are a bunch of online networking things that you can attend to. And it always starts from forming a connection, I think.
Well, do you Joseph and Emer, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah. I also started going to film festivals. I think online there's a lot of research you can do. If there's something you hear in a film you watch, or you see the credits, maybe doing research, finding out, making genuine connections to maybe music you've heard that you like, or people you've maybe seen as part of a project, and just reaching out maybe. But there are the two different ways, either in person, which I find I've met more people by just in person, but you can also be very savvy online, just finding out who's doing what and who's part of what organization or connection, and maybe seeing if you have a connection with someone else by like 10 feet apart, and then reaching out to someone. But yeah, music supervisor is probably a good idea. I actually haven't really done that.
I've sent out a lot of cold emails, a lot. And, varying, mileage varies greatly from place to place. And a lot of people just, they don't have time for that. And, but, it's, I think a lot of it is just also finding people that you connect with in terms of not just the desire to work together, but also just your point of view, your community, those sorts of things, I think are important.
Yeah, 100% agree. It's a genuine human connection. I think that's always, it stems from that. And I feel that people can feel too, like whether you're trying to get something from someone or is it a very organic encounter. And those are the most fruitful collaborations, I think.
Yeah.
Starts from there.
One of my first conversations with this director that I started working with frequently, I think the first time we talked was we maybe spent about 5 minutes talking about the film and then talked for about 2 hours about everything else in our lives. We had so many connections and it just, so many common interests, and, it was like, okay, this is going to be a very good collaboration, I can tell.
Yeah, forging the sort of long-term relationships, if you can work on multiple projects with a particular director that you have a real sort of connection with, I think that's gold. I mean, then you've struck gold if you can do that, as opposed to constantly needing to be, fishing for leads and so forth. Of course, we probably all need to do that to some degree. So that's a very good question. Usually we have to complete our projects on strict deadlines, or at least, that's certainly my experience, and I think that's the experience of a lot of other composers out there. And I wanted to ask about what you all do when you're sort of in this crunch period and you need to come up with an idea, right? There need to be a certain number of cues completed by a certain date, right? What do you do to maintain your sort of creative flow in that kind of situation?
I feel that, at least for me, I love having a routine. Having a routine is so important. And as much as, deadlines come, I always make sure that I reserve some time to center myself. So for me, it's like I wake up at 5 a.m. It's like, that's a strict routine. And from 5 to 6 is my time. I can center myself, do some meditation, journaling, whatever. And having that start of the day, despite having crazy deadlines, I think is such a solid foundation for me. Because if I don't have that, I feel that I can't tackle on the day. And I'm sure it differs for everybody. But I like to keep it balanced, I think. And I feel the most productive if I'm balanced, if I feel balanced. Yeah. I don't know, is it the same for you guys?
Yeah, definitely. If you can do, sport in your day as well, and hiking or go to the beach. But it's difficult when you have deadlines and then you're like, well, I can't do anything else than this because. So I mean, if you can get up at 5 a.m., that probably really helps. I tend to stay up just really late. Yeah, just organization, knowing what's the focus of your day, like these specific cues, or using a spreadsheet where you just tell yourself, I'm going to get 5 minutes of this done today. But sometimes you might not be working out that specific day. And then sometimes it's better to just sleep on that cue or do something else. So it's kind of a juggling game of what's working, what's not. And it's probably different for every person, but I would definitely say about balance is probably key to just being able to maintain this over time. So finding out what's balanced to you.
Yeah.
Important. Yeah.
Not spending all of your time in the studio.
Trying not to.
You can help it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is also just, it's it's having a routine and being organized and knowing what you're also capable of delivering. If you know that you can turn around, 2 to 4 minutes of music in a couple of days in a certain amount of time, then you can be realistic with yourself as to like what you're able to do. But if someone needs something at like kind of an unrealistic deadline, then you need to be able to communicate that honestly. And I think that's, some of that is also just doing a lot of work, being in the studio, and just knowing what you can do. But you can, if you have things like MIDI and mixing templates built up in your DAW of choice, then that also helps you be able to work faster. And a lot of it is just about self-awareness, what you know that you can accomplish and what you can deliver, and being honest about that.
And just for the benefit of the audience, DAW means digital audio workstation. So something like Pro Tools or Cubase or Logic and so forth. There's just a ton of them out there. But the software where you do your music composing and recording. We have a question from Jay-Z. How do you financially support yourself when you first get started? Do you feel awkward to ask to be paid if you were scoring for a friend? What do you all think about this one? Because ultimately it is a business that we're in that we do want to get paid for, right? I think that in terms of, from my experience, in terms of scoring for a friend, that was how I got started composing for film and media such as that. I was more involved in doing pop style projects. And then my friend saw a music video that I had done for a pop song and said, hey, do you want to score my short film? They did not realizing that that's a completely different animal, from working on pop music. But I said, oh, sure. Yeah, okay. No problem. And that's how I really fell in love with doing it. But for those early projects for Brent, I didn't feel like I could charge him money to do that. I didn't feel like I could start doing that until I had done a few of those, sort of favor type of things. So that's my experience with scoring for a friend. My sense is, and hopefully, you have some kind of composing adjacent thing you can do for moments when you're not necessarily composing. Like Emer is obviously, he a great violinist. And can work with composers if she's not personally composing things herself. And I think you also do that too, Joseph. You also do some sound, or did in the past.
Yeah, I for a while I was doing a little bit of performing and some sound work, like actual like sound effects editing and stuff like that. And for a while, I had a day job and I was just sort of scoring on weekends and nights and whenever time would allow. But, it was kind of the same. Like when you're first starting out, it's difficult to charge. It's difficult to figure out what to charge and how. But I think, again, a lot of that is also just being aware of what your financial requirements are and understanding what you need to be able to survive and, again, what you're capable of delivering. And it depends on the nature of the film too. And like how much music, if it's a short film, obviously it's going to be a lot different than, a feature or something.
Yeah. So again, it's one of those things that where it really varies depending on your individual circumstances. But I like doing something that keeps you close to music. Even if you're not writing yourself, like that would be my sense of that. From my point of view,
I agree with you, Chris. It's definitely tough when you're starting out. Not gonna lie. But how I was able to support myself was to be an assistant to composers, and like what Chris said, it's still beneficial to learn to be close, to do something that's close to music if you have the opportunity to. But it is tough. In the beginning.
Yeah. And since we're talking about the business side, when people do start getting paid, then often there's uncertainty about how to negotiate the arrangement for getting paid. I wonder what kind of tips you would give someone who's early on in the process, maybe someone who's about to be paid for the first time to make music, and wants essentially to make sure that they're not getting taken advantage of and they're not taking advantage of the person who they're working for and so forth.
In the beginning, I had to ask a lot of my composer friends, like getting a sense of ideas, like how in this how would you charge for a per minute of music? What is realistic for this type of ensemble? Because again, like it can be, each project can be like, oh, I have 5 minutes of music, but is it 5 minute fully orchestrated, fully produced, that takes a lot of time to program? Is it that kind of music, or is it a piano sketch that it's a bit takes less time to complete? So it's also like to have that conversation in the beginning. What is the sound that the director is looking for? And realistically, with experience, you would start to know, okay, this type of music I can write, I can turn it around pretty quick. So maybe we can adjust the budget there. But I think it does help with the more you do it, the more experience you have. I think that's you start to adjust your budget from there, I think.
Yeah. I think it's also tricky in figuring that out over time from project to project. What the indie, what's their budget, but also realistically how much work is involved. Probably reaching out to colleagues and chatting to them about it. It's an ongoing process.
Or forums. There's a bunch of forums out there that people share their experience, and I found that really helpful as well.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the project for sure. I mean, I've kind of run the gamut where sometimes you charge per minute of music, sometimes you're figuring out just like a basic, flat amount of time. And as Joy and Emer have said, it just depends on the nature of the score. I mean, is it like a ukulele score, or is it like a full orchestra with choir and a rock band? Like, one of those is going to take a significant more amount of time to prepare.
If you're asked, even like a 30-second piece of music, if it needs to be a 30-second piece of music that has a definitive arc, like it goes through, changes in dynamics within such a compressed period of time, that's going to require some detail-oriented work. So the fact that it's a short piece of music doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to require a lot of work to get done.
Yeah, and then I think it's our job to be upfront about it. You have to communicate to your director if that's the case. Like, how much time do you think it's going to take? What's the turnaround? And then hopefully we'll be able to come to a compromise of how to charge.
Yeah, sometimes I think if it's just a short amount of music that it's less minutes, but putting that into a short amount of time takes, if it's like you said, a specific arc and specific moments, then that can be an equal amount of work than a few scenes that don't need as much exact attention. So
we have another question here from Tim Boland. Do you have an agent, and have they been proactive and useful in finding you projects to submit and work on? Maybe another way to put this is also, how do you go about finding good representation?
I have an agent. I just got signed on a few months ago, and what I've learned is you still have to be proactive, even if you have an agent. It's a two-way street. Like you have your own relationships and your own connections, and doesn't mean that when you have an agent that I can just sit back and let them do the work, because it's ultimately your career, and you take charge of finding your self-work. And of course, having an agent is helpful because they help open doors for you. But again, like even if they set up a meeting for you, you still have to you need to do the work. You need to show up and hone in your skills.
Yeah, I also have an agent since the last few months, and I think it's a mixture of continuing yourself to put yourself out there, and hoping your agent's putting your name out there too. In terms of projects to submit on, I guess it depends what pops up, but you don't want to rely on that either. But I guess together, putting your name, both reaching out to different people together can ultimately help you in the long run, have more eggs in a basket. I think it's good if you can have someone else also reaching out on your behalf. But again, also don't, continue finding out ways to get your music out there too.
Yeah.
I do not have an agent, so if you're an agent out there. Everything that I've heard about, like, essentially agent sort of comes to you if you're regularly getting work, and then they will, I don't know, swoop in and take 10% of your money. I don't know. But it would, I definitely, everything that I've seen, it's just, you are still kind of doing the same amount of work in terms of like fostering the relationships and stuff that you have. An agent is helpful, but it's by no means like, I have an agent now and I'm now set. So
yeah,
I agree.
Just keep grinding.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, everyone, and that seems like a universal truth. I mean, for the whole entertainment industry, that you have to be comfortable with promoting yourself, no matter what part of it you happen to be in. If you have a distributor for your independent film, for instance, that doesn't mean that you don't need to promote the film. In fact, you're still going to probably need to do the majority of the promotion. That's something that I've found when working on independent films, because I've done some producing work in addition to composing. So yeah, that's something that's kind of ubiquitous for the industry, that everyone needs to get comfortable with their own promotion. And in terms of people who are on the post-production side, that may not always come as naturally.
Yeah, and you are your own business, like you are your own business person. So ultimately, it comes from you.
Yeah, figuring out how to be a business person at the same time as a composer it's the challenge.
Yeah,
you have to wear many, many hats.
Yeah. Let's go to another question here. I think this will be the last question, since I think we're almost out of time. But yeah, hopefully we can get your input on this. How about placing already composed work with directors? Does that happen for you sometimes? I think that this is in terms of like reusing a cue that you've already done. That would be the holy grail for me, if I could just reuse all the cues that didn't make it into films and projects that I worked on, if I could use them for something else. But normally, I don't think I've ever done that.
I haven't either. I have just a huge library of stuff, but most of it is so specific to the film. I mean, I guess some of it potentially could be readapted to another project, but for the most part, it's just, it's so specific to that project. It is what it is.
Yeah.
But I'll come up with something new and something better.
Yeah, I always just use the inspiration of the current project to just keep writing music. And then if you have extra music, maybe it can be used for something else. But yeah, I find it's just focusing on the project at hand and getting the chance to write more new music.
Yeah, and seeing it as, you're always getting more experience, and I think building up your skills every time you compose, even if the piece doesn't get used. I mean, the optimistic perspective that I try to keep on it.
Yeah, it's good to expand and explore new ideas with every project. I find it brings you in new areas, and that's great about the process.
Yeah.
When I was back in high school, my band director at the time, when I first told him that I was interested in writing music, he said, get ready to write a lot of music, because if you want to write some good songs, you're going to have to write a lot of bad ones too. And I think anyone who's a writer in any capacity, writer of prose, poetry, or screenplays or whatever, just knows that like writing tons of stories, you're going to realize that, every time you sit down, you learn and grow. And whether that particular project is, ends up being something good and usable that you want to continue to promote and produce, or whether it's just something like, okay, well, this was good, but not good enough, and then you set it aside and then you move on to the next thing. I mean, like, it's just a constant, it's a constant thing.
Cool. Well, thank you all so much. We're about at time, but thank you all so much for joining me, and for your wisdom and expertise that you've shared with the audience. With that, I guess we'll bring this to a close.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Well, thank you everyone hopefully you found that educational and inspiring. Certainly I did. And we do have an announcement of the winner of our DaVinci Resolve seat, which I think that we're going to get in one moment. Oh yes, here we go. And the winner of the DaVinci Resolve seat is Heather Renee. So Heather, we will reach out to you with information about how to get the DaVinci Resolve seat. It's a really cool program, and hopefully you have some fun with it. With that, we're looking forward to seeing you with for our next panel. And hopefully you can join us for the film festival that we're doing, which, as I said, is on November 13. And finally, a special thank you to our sponsor, Blackmagic Design, which is a rare company that loves filmmakers, and they're why we get to do basically everything at no cost to filmmakers, why we can present all this free content. So with that, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon.